Welcome back to the Oracle Sports Podcast. I'm Oracle Sports editor Nolan Brown.
And I'm Hannah Halili.
And we have a very packed show. We always have a packed show every week, but there's a lot to kind of pick apart here. And so we'll just jump into it. First thing on the docket is we just learned that USF men's basketball player David Collins, probably one of the best players in the past couple of years, just a really standout player. He declared that he would be going to the draft, kind of similar to LaQuincy Rito last year, just to kind of learn, get the feel of everything. But just literally maybe 20 minutes ago, he announced that it was announced that he'd be coming back to USF for next season, which is a really big boon. I think that's going to be a really great thing for the team and could give them a little bit of a boost in terms of NCAA status getting into that tournament. So great piece of news for there. And now we're going to jump to the flip side of that and talk a little bit about what happened with USF football just a couple of days ago. 2 players tested positive for coronavirus. Those players, we don't know who they are. We can't know because that's kind of a legal thing. But the rest of the players who have been cleared to practice for voluntary workouts, they're going to go ahead and keep continuing. They're going to keep going in that. So it's interesting that we see that. I mean, it's good that USF is taking those players and who are still good, letting them keep going. But it begs the question, is that the extent of it? Is just 2 players, is that going to be it? I mean, I'm sure there are bound to be some more. I'm not hoping there are more, but just given the situation. So Hannah, what's your take on that? Do you think it's a promising sign that they're doing that and they're keeping them together, or keeping the players that are still practicing?
I mean, it's all up in the air right now with everything. And it's hard to have like a specific answer, like what do I think? Just because, we're seeing it across all the schools, and even Texas that we're going to go against. That's the first game. So, I don't really know. And I'm not really sure because, that's a really good question is it going to continue or is it going to stay here? And then their coaches and, everyone they're around and the team, it's just crazy.
Yeah, and our guest later in the pod, we have a great guest, a little bit different than we had before, Kenny Morales of Spectrum Sports. We kind of touch on this with him, and he says, if a guy gets it, a healthy, athlete, basically, if he gets it, he may be fine. There's a good chance he will be, but there are some older coaches that are still there, and their parents, their grandparents, whatnot. So how does that, and especially if you're in that atmosphere where you're with a bunch of other guys, and so one of them may have it, one of them may not. You never know, and so taking that into the equation is definitely I don't know. It's hard to kind of visualize what could happen. I mean, like Hannah said, everything's up in the air. I mean, that's just kind of how it's been. And, now we're seeing that so many other teams have had players that are testing positive here and there. And it just, I'm optimistic still about the football season ahead. And we talk about this too with Kenny, but I don't know. It's hard to kind of look at it realistically and say, yeah, it's going to happen in its full force. It's going to happen, how it's meant to be played in the football season. I don't think we'll have that happen. We don't know. Like we said, it's still months away. A lot of things can happen in between.
I mean, I feel like this is a general theme in all of our podcast episodes is this question of, is it worth it to continue our sports if it's going to be changing like this? And now we have the factor of people's lives being at risk, is it worth it? And should we stop and hold some more and wait to see if it'll get better, or do we just bite the bullet and, continue to adapt? Because, as humans, we should adapt. So, there's just this balance and healthy medium of trying to find the right way to combat and, continue with it. But, nobody knows what's going on. Nobody knows for schools, for sports, really anything.
Yeah, and it's a good thing that you say that. It's just all up in the air in general for everything, even pro sports too. I mean, we're supposed to have the NBA, the MLS back, NWSL back, things like that, which is great. It's cool to see that those leagues are trying to find a way to come back too. But it also begs the question, especially with the NBA and the MLS, they'll be in the same city basically. It'll be in Orlando. I think I called it the Disney Extravaganza Sports Bash or something like that. It's
Probably.
cool. It's a cool concept. It's great, but a few NBA players have stepped up and said, I don't know if I feel comfortable about playing this season, or I don't really want to play this season. I think Kyrie Irving has been at the forefront of that. He's been the one that's like, I think it's a big distraction. I think from everything that's going on, A, with coronavirus, and then B, with Black Lives Matter too. And those are still two very important things that are happening. And sports, they're the kind of distractor from everything around us. And I feel like if from their point of view, if you bring those things back, then it's going to be a distraction from that. And in a way, I kind of agree. I mean, obviously, I want sports back. I mean, that means we have jobs, but at the same time, there are such bigger issues that are
Mhm.
at play.
It's so interesting too because in Orlando, Orange County, because I'm pretty much from there, the numbers are going up like crazy. And they just initiated, like in Tampa, the rule of always requiring a face covering. And, Disney just opened up, Universal's opened up, but, just the idea of having all these people again traveling back to the hub of Central Florida, where we had UCF players test for positive. Now we're having more athletes coming to the same area. The other numbers of just the people who live there are going up. It's crazy. And then I kind of agree that the sports is kind of like a distraction for a lot of people. Kenny talked about this too, how it's an outlet for a lot of people to kind of just go to and just forget about everything going on. That could be nice. But at the same time, when there's all these things going on, do we want that distraction? Is it necessary? Is it adding, or is it, taking away from what's really mattering right now? So, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, we're seeing these leagues that are. I say leagues, but I'm talking about one in particular. I'm talking about MLB. Uh, that is just such a mess right now. Whatever's happening over there,
All
um,
about.
we saw that there was an agreement made, and then there wasn't, and then there was, and then there wasn't, and then it was this. It's just this back and forth. It's so hard to keep up. I mean, like it's fun to keep up with, but it's so hard too. And I mean, a lot of players they've kind of rallied around this whole idea of tell us when and where, and they just was like, whenever we want to play, like just tell us where, we'll be there. And it's just I don't know, I can't even fathom what's going on behind the scenes of
Oh,
all these owners that are trying to figure this out. Players Association, it's hard to tell what's even happening with that, and just the mess that is the season that is upcoming, or maybe a theoretical season at this point. It's just so hard to think of. And then when you see other leagues like the NWSL, which as we remember is going to be the first league coming back next weekend actually in Utah, the Challenge Cup. They have told their players, if you want to go to this thing, that's great. If you don't want to go, that's fine too. And I think that the league has been so open with their players and have been like, hey, just tell us what you want to do, kind of thing. Somehow, I mean, I don't know all the facets of it, but somehow having that dialogue has just worked for the NWSL. And I think I don't even know what's happening with MLB. And there's just such a mishmash of things happening. And it's just right now in this time, we're seeing so many leagues that have handled this everything just so well, and they've done it, the best that they could. And then you have MLB who's just doing whatever. I don't even know what's happening with that.
you know, I don't know. It's a mess. It's a mess. Nobody knows what's going on.
Yeah, it is a mess. I mean, and also you got to think about it too. These players, they don't want to risk themselves. It's probably the sport where you'll least likely risk it, because I mean we saw baseball was like one of the first sports to come back, at least in Asia. We saw the Taiwanese Baseball League, then we saw KBO, Korean Baseball Organization, and then just I think today the Japanese baseball. league started up. So we have baseball back pretty much everywhere else,
Except
but
here.
but here. So I don't know. Again, there's so much to think about, and it's probably a difficult, you know, decision to make, definitely, especially as cases are continuing to rise, at least in Florida and around the country too. Um, but it's so weird to see other leagues just kind of figure it out and say, all right, here's what we're gonna do, and then MLB is just continuing to run around like a
I mean,
chicken with its head cut off.
just alluding to Kenny, I can't talk. Kenny later, he says how, it's been difficult trying to put these stories together and trying to find things. And, he just says you have to think outside of the box when it comes to this stuff. But even him and, sports journalism, everyone's kind of just going with the flow, trying to pick up whatever they can. But I kind of want to switch directions a little bit to UF football. And they just recently, I think, like disbanded their Gator chants. So Nolan, what do you think? So basically, just a little bit of background. They said that Gator bait was used as a racial slur against African American babies in the 1890s and early 1900s. So they disbanded the chant because of the school themselves did not say that they did not believe that they had themselves a racial background, or racist background, but they do know that the word itself had racist history. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's a good step. I mean, because people, they were probably chanting that without even realizing it. I mean, I remember when I first saw the headline for that, I'm thinking, what is that? What does that really have to do with it? And just, I wasn't like, I was genuinely questioning, because I was like, that's interesting. And so I read further, and I read that, horrifically, they'd use African American babies as gator bait. That was the thing. And that's just a terrible thing. And then when you think about this chant that, people probably didn't even know what it was about. It's just, IUF were the Gators, Gator bait. But now that you know the backstory behind it, and now that people know the backstory, it makes you sort of think a little bit more about, okay, what else is there that seems harmless on the exterior, and it's
There's
just
and then the Clemson honors college that they
yeah,
put last week, this week, about
yeah.
how it's named after who was it?
Was it John Calhoun?
John C. Calhoun. And he owned, in the bio on the Clemson website, it said that he was an owner of many slaves and the school itself was built on his plantation. So,
There you go. Proof's in the pudding right there.
yeah,
But
exactly.
it's just interesting to see so many things that are coming to the forefront now because of everything that's happening with Black Lives Matter movement. And I think it was just last night that the SEC told Mississippi, if you don't change your state flag, you could forget about hosting any sort of championships. And it's interesting to see that from the SEC, because Mississippi is a place where there's so many teams, and there's so many big teams there, and for them to openly say that, change your flag basically, or we're not going to um, you're not going to be allowed to host any games there. And Mississippi's flag is a very Confederate based flag, really. And it's interesting to see that. It's interesting to see that the SEC is taking that big of a step and saying, hey, this ain't cool, and you're not going to be able to host anything if you don't change it.
Mhm. I think it's really cool to see, honestly, it's kind of sad that we took this long to realize all of these things were going on, but it's better that it happens now than it happening later. So when we relate it back to sports, is it good to bring it all again? Players are uncomfortable saying that it could be a distraction from these things, and all these things are getting done, and it's a huge progressive movement, and that's really great. So, I can see where the athletes are coming from when they're saying that they're uncomfortable bringing it all back so soon. But at the same time, sometimes we want that distraction from everything going on.
Yeah, but in this case, I feel like in this time, these issues need to be on the forefront. Um, Definitely Black Lives Matter. And also, people just seem to forget that there's a global pandemic happening. They're like, oh, hey, we're good. I think there's a chart. It was from The Office, and it was like um, one bar was like the awareness of corona, and it was like really long, and then it was like the actual corona, and it was like really short, and then it said like now, and it was like awareness of corona was really short, and then the corona was really big. So it's so weird how that's flip-flopped. I mean, as it's gotten worse, people have been like, oh yeah, we can still go to the beach, like, we can go to Starbucks now. And it's like, yeah,
What
you may. Huh?
you just added me completely.
I'm sorry, totally sorry. But I was thinking that myself, and I was just like, man, I really want to go to, like, I think my mom has been talking about going to the beach, and I'm like, I don't know. I mean, like, should we? So, but yeah, it's a thing to consider. It's like, just because we can doesn't mean we should
Mhm.
necessarily.
I
And
mean, like
so,
this weekend, and it wasn't that packed, and we made the decision that there were a lot of people that we were going to turn around and leave, but at least where we were, it was like just us in that area, and then we're pretty good about disinfecting everything. We have Clorox with us, bleach, like we carry things of bleach to like disinfect everything. So I mean, if you're taking the steps to do it, then I don't see why not. But then there's also people who really don't care. So
yeah, it's interesting, and a lot of businesses are like, hey, you can't come in here if you're not wearing a mask. And um, aside from that whole order that was sent out by Mary Jane Castor, just businesses have been taking steps on their own. They're like, we don't want to risk it. So I
yeah.
think fair play to them. Definitely a right step with that. Um, but yeah, we'll segue it to our discussion with Kenny, and you know we definitely want sports back, and so does he. So we'll get right into it. Our guest this week is a little bit different, a little bit something kind of new that we're doing. We have here Kenny Morales. He's the sports reporter and anchor for Spectrum Bay News 9. He recently celebrated a 2-year anniversary, so congrats on that, Kenny. Um,
Thank you.
U-
Thank you.
UCF class of 2013 alum. You know what? We'll take it. We'll take it. Um,
Thank you for being so kind and accepting.
so, Kenny, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate you coming on.
Absolutely, man. Thank you so much for having me. I love doing stuff like this.
I guess first question we want to ask, and I think this is kind of the question that I've been asking everybody, is just, what have you been doing in your free time? I mean, we have so much of it now, and of course we have so much that's keeping us busy too, but what's been going on in your free time?
So a lot of my free time has been, I feel like, so I'm not really big into movies. So my girlfriend's gotten me into watch like a lot of movies. I never like seen any classics at all. And so she's got me to got into like a bunch of Quentin Tarantino movies, like The Kill Bills, Django Unchained. What do we watch? Goodness, I don't know. We watched The Sixth Sense the other night. She's like into thrillers and scary movies. I hate that stuff. But done a lot of that. Been trying to do a little more, staying in shape, going for runs, working out, anything to get out of the house and sit, but while also safely social distancing. And watching old games, man. With no live sports, I've been, turning back to YouTube and watching old football games, old basketball games. I'm a Magic fan, so I'll go back and watch old Magic games from back in the day, from Penny and Shaq days where I was, too small to remember. Yeah, just some stuff like that to keep me busy. It's definitely a challenge, that's for sure.
It's funny you mentioned Tarantino movies. I remember that one night you were tweeting about how you saw Django Unchained that night, and you were just having a blast
Yes.
with that one.
Oh my good dude, that might be the best ending I've seen to a movie ever. I mean, it's one of my all-time favorite endings. I absolutely loved it.
It's so great. What would be what's your favorite Tarantino movie that you've seen in this time now?
That's tough. I really do think it was Django Unchained because I've also seen Inglourious Bastards, which was great, awesome movie as well. But the whole film, Django Unchained, from beginning to end, I was encapsulated. I thought it was awesome, and the ending is just so funny and perfect. And I don't know. To me, that was like my favorite. The Kill Bills were awesome too. Like, don't get me wrong, the Kill Bills were great, but I think Django Unchained gets my vote.
So I want to touch on your journey, where you are now versus where you came from. Do you think you could give us a brief overview of your professional career?
Sure, yeah. So, like Nolan said, I graduated UCF 2013, and 2 months after graduation, I got my first job in local TV at a small station in a town called Wausau in Wisconsin. And I was there as, what was the station? News Channel 7, WSAW. I was there for about a year and a half, and I worked as a sports reporter / fill-in sports anchor. So got to be on the desk here and there, but mostly did my stuff, in the field, and covered a lot of high school. And that's kind of, what most people are going to do when you're coming out of college and you go to your first small market job, at least in TBN and print, I would say as well. A lot of high school coverage. We had a local Division III school we covered a lot. And but what the one nice thing was, and it was a big selling point for me, was we got to cover the Packers a lot. And that was really cool. Coming out of college, being like, whoa, I get to cover Aaron Rodgers. And this was at the time when they were still, they're still good, but like this is when they were like at their, I would say, peak after their Super Bowl run. They had, Jordy Nelson, Randall Cobb, Eddie Lacy when he was still kind of good, and all these dudes. And the season I was there was their run to the NFC Championship game, and then the botched onside kick. So that was like I got to be there for the Packers home game against the Cowboys in the playoffs, where the infamous did Dez catch it? Was it a touchdown or not? It was in my eyes, but that's neither here nor there. So I got to do that for about a year and a half, and then I was kind of sick of the cold, and I got a job as the weekend sports anchor at the CBS affiliate in Tallahassee, WCTV. And I got there pretty much the start of like the post Jameis Winston era. Like I got here like a month before he got drafted by the Bucks, or there. And I got to be there all the way from that till the very beginning of the Willie Taggart era. And so I got to kind of see all that drama, if you will, and cover Florida A&M, which was really cool. HBCU up there gave me a different perspective on athletics through that school, and a lot of South Georgia, which if you know high school football, along with Florida, South Georgia is just an absolute factory when it comes to talent there. So it was really cool to cover all that stuff. And then lo and behold, like Nolan said, a little more than 2 years ago now, got the job down here in St. Pete, and I've loved it ever since. Getting the chance to cover pretty much everything I've wanted to cover, which was I still want to cover high school sports. There's something cool about Friday Night Lights to me, and high school sports in general. But also getting the chance to cover a college team like USF, and I still get the chance to cover FSU when they give me the opportunity, and pro teams. I mean, I love getting a chance to cover Rays, Lightning, Bucks, and the Rowdies. Being a soccer fan, I think it's awesome that we have a pro soccer team here as well. And then I live in downtown St. Pete, so they're 2-3 blocks away from me. So it's fun to, and same with the Trop. So it's fun to not only go and cover them, but I'm a sports fan, and my days off, I'm usually at those games when there's not a pandemic going on.
Do you want to go?
No, go ahead.
You mentioned that you worked in Wisconsin, and this kind of made me question, how is it reporting in two different climates? Because it's super cold up there and it's super hot down here. And whenever I'm watching football, and especially like the Packers, and they're playing a game and it's like snowing, it's like mind-boggling to me. Like, wait, how? Yeah. So, how is working in those two different places, and what made you want to come back to Florida?
So it's definitely pick your poison between like the summer heat of Florida or like the bitter cold of Wisconsin. I think growing up in Florida, I just got used to the heat, so it was more so for me. Whereas I can't stand the cold, I can't stand the snow, and that was a huge adjustment for me. Like I remember numerous times going out to shoot high school football, and it's snowing, it's 10 below zero. And I've got like a bunch of hand warmers in my gloves. I got hand warmers in my shoes for my fingers and my toes. And I'm still cold. I'm still freezing cold. And then got to do a live shot out in the snow. And you're just like trying your best so your teeth don't shatter. It's a bit of an adjustment, but it gets easier as time progresses. And also you'll be surprised how quickly you adapt to the climate. Because I remember, living down here, it gets below 60, people are breaking out sweaters and boots and whatever. Up there after that winter, when it got to like 40 or 50, I was like breaking out the shorts and the sandals. I was excited. Let's go to the lake or something. It is gorgeous out today. but it was definitely a bit of an adjustment for sure. When it comes to reporting, you have to be prepared to handle those cold temps. And also when it comes to driving, I've never really driven in snow. And I would say like two separate occasions I spun out in like a road and was like, had like a mini heart attack and like had to call my mom and like freak out to her. Like, I almost died trying to go to this high school hockey game. Why am I doing this? But it all worked out in the end, thankfully.
What a great story to tell your future family. I almost spun out and died while on my way to a high school hockey game.
Seriously, it's true. Twice. It was actually the same night. Going there and coming back, I spun out 2 different times, and both times I had to call my mom and be like, "This ain't worth it. Nope. Why am I doing this? This absolutely it's so not worth my life." But it I guess it was clearly because I stuck with it. So it gets easier for sure.
You definitely had some luck that night if you're going underway there and then underway back and you spin out both times.
Seriously. Well, the good thing is those roads, it was such a small town, not a lot of cars are out and about, you know? So I get to spin out in the privacy of just myself.
Was that the first time that you saw snow? Was when you moved there?
No, I used to live in New Jersey. And so I'd seen snow since I was like 7, and I lived there for about 3 years. So I dealt with snow. I dealt with the cold. That's why I was like, yeah, whatever, I can handle it. It's a different kind of cold in the Midwest, I think. Like Jersey, I don't know if it ever got below 0 when I was living there as a kid. Wisconsin, it was one of the worst winters they had in a while. And it was like 20 or 30 below 0 some days with the wind chill. And I mean, it's just, that's like you step outside and you breathe and the air hurts your lungs, that kind of cold. And that to me is like, when it was my days off, I just stayed inside, Netflix, wine, beer, just relax, take a breather. The gym wasn't going to happen that day unless it was at home. I mean, I just absolutely no way was going outside in that.
And then you decided to come back here and get the nice warm weather. But
I remember just driving through just Tallahassee and being like, "Oh, there you are, son, in 80-degree weather. I missed you so much."
Well, with that journey that you've had, I mean, that's just a crazy, up and back kind of journey. But I want to ask, what originally got you into this business? I mean, it's such a fun business, but like you were saying, it's got its perks to it sometimes,
Yeah.
and sometimes it means you standing out in 0-degree weather and whatnot.
Exactly right.
But how did this come to you? How did this sort of business come to you? Is it something that you always wanted to do as a kid, or did it kind of just hit you on the head one day?
I think it wasn't what I always wanted to do as a kid. Like definitely, like I grew up playing basketball. That was my like favorite sport, and to this day still is. And I think the dream up until like freshman year of high school was like, I want to be in the NBA. And then I was like, okay, I think I'm stuck at 5'11". I don't think I'm growing anymore. I don't think the NBA is happening. So then just out of nowhere, I just kind of randomly was watching SportsCenter, and I was like, these guys seem like they have a lot of fun. Like, what did they do to get there? And then just a simple Google search, like, hey, look at these guys. They all studied some form of communications or, broadcast journalism or English majors, something along those lines. And that's kind of where it came from, the idea to want to do it. And then when I got to UCF and got more into kind of the news aspect of it, learning more about how to shoot video, that kind of got me more into it as well. And the whole idea of storytelling really piqued my interest. It was something I never really liked as a kid. Like I would consider myself a bad writer back in the day. I still think I'm working on what I'm doing, but I think I've gotten better. But yeah, it never was really something I enjoyed as a kid. But for some reason in college, the idea of not only getting to interview people and share their stories, specifically athletes or coaches, whoever's involved with the game, and getting to share those tidbits, really, I don't know, it kind of just, it spoke to me. It made me feel good. To me, I think it's a cliche say, but everyone has a story. And especially I feel like in sports, there's always something cool like that to discover, or a new tidbit. And so on top of getting the chance to interview those people, share their stories via writing, I also really enjoy the aspect of video. I think that provides a different kind of element when it comes to storytelling. I think of the ones that always get me are Tom Rinaldi. I mean, any Tom Rinaldi story, I'm probably going to cry. And I know that going into it. But I think that just shows how much sports can mean to people when something is like, I don't know, it can be Alabama football. I have no personal ties to it. But if it's a story that is so just, heart wrenching that it can move you to tears, I'm like, okay, that's something worth sharing with other people. And I enjoy that. And then at the end of the day, I like that sports, while it is entertainment, it's an outlet. It's an escape for people. And I like that with being able to do, like, I like the show that we do. I like that it's 30 minutes. I like that we can touch on a lot of different things. But the biggest thing I like is that for 30 minutes, whatever happened in your day, just come on and sit down and just put the worries away for a second and just kind of zone out. I like being able to provide that. That's kind of a long answer.
You talked about how you love storytelling. When you're in journalism, that's pretty much the core of it, is sharing stories. And, while you're doing that, I'm sure you've met some very amazing people and you've shared some very amazing things. So I want to know, what's the most memorable of the jobs that you've had? And, give us a little answer as to why and just explain.
Yeah, I think the one that always sticks out to me is a young man that I covered in Tallahassee. His name was Cam Brown, and he was a football player there for a local school. They call it Florida High. Technically, it's like Florida State University School, something like that, FSUS. But he was a football player there, had just recently signed to play with Western Carolina, an FBS school. And like a month or two later, he developed bone cancer. And it was really aggressive to the point that he eventually had to have his leg amputated. But the school stuck with him and honored his scholarship and said, hey, don't worry about playing. You'll come here and we'll help you become a coach. That was his other dream. He wanted to coach football. And I was there. I was there when he first signed and he was ready to go, be a regular football player. Then I was with him in the gym, like not long after he got his leg amputated. He was back in the gym working out, doing squats, doing leg presses with one leg, mind you, and like doing chemo, like earlier in the day. But he still had the energy to go and do this because he was just that determined. And unfortunately, a few months later, he passed away. And I went to his funeral with my girlfriend, and I just remember, his family had it was a funeral, but they made it a party because they said, Cam always wanted to have a party. He didn't want anyone to be sad. He said it at a funeral. He said he wanted people to celebrate his life. And that always made me, I'd like bawled after that. I mean, obviously I wanted to celebrate and be happy that his family was happy and that they were trying to celebrate his life. But at the moment, it was really hard. And I think just his spirit to never give up and always smile. I mean, the kid was always smiling, even through chemo and all that stuff. That like really, really resonated with me, and not only meant a lot to me that I got to share his story a couple different times, but I just got to be around him. It made me feel like I was becoming a better person, just being associated with him.
Wow.
Yeah, what a story of perseverance, really, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're in a situation like that, I mean, you have to handle those kind of stories with such care. I mean, care in terms of telling the story itself and also respecting the individual as well. And when you come across a story like that, how do you handle that sort of balance of, okay, I got to tell the story, but at the same time, I want to be careful about it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult balance for sure. I think the one thing I always try to tell people, especially like, I think it's a little easier with folks that are actual patients. Let's say if it's someone who's sick, than it is, let's say, their family members. They might have a harder time dealing with it. Like when I interviewed his mom and dad, and that's a case where before we click record, I'll say, hey, if you ever need a moment just to collect yourselves, you let me know. I this is not live. This is taped. We go along as we need to, right? If you need however long you need to collect yourself, if it gets to that point, you let me know. I try to share that with folks and let them know that this is a safe environment. And you also just have to kind of, it's hard to figure out exactly what you need to do, but just show some empathy. Just try to put yourself. Yeah, I know that's a difficult thing to do, but try to put yourself in their shoes and try to phrase your questions carefully, right? You don't want to say anything insensitive or anything like that. And just do the best you can. Just be yourself and just understand that they're going through a really difficult situation. Be can't think of the word I'm thinking of, but be grateful that they're allowing you to come in and share this story with you. And at the end of the day, just try your best to. I mean, it's like every interview, but try your best to pretend the camera's not there and that you're just trying to learn about these people, right? Make them feel comfortable. It's tough though. It is.
Speaking of things that are tough, were there any times that you ever doubted yourself, or minus the skidding ice driving incident, any time that you really didn't know if you could keep going, and how did you overcome that?
Yeah, absolutely. I still have those moments. Those moments, I don't think they go away. In a weird way, I think they push you a little bit. They definitely decrease. I would say that. I don't have those moments as often as I used to. But definitely when I was first starting off in Wisconsin, I had those moments. Oh, man. I don't know, multiple times a month. I mean, I called my parents so often saying, like, I'm ready to give up. I don't think I can do this. It was tough. It was tough for sure. But that happens to everybody. I mean, there are so many people, coworkers from the past, present, that'll tell you, you are going to doubt yourself at times. It is just going to happen. That is just a fact, I think, unless you're just like super confident, which kudos to you. But you just have to remind yourself to hang in there and keep going, and that it will get better. And it has gotten better. And I can go back and look at my old reels, my old stories, and be like, whoo, okay, definitely a lot better. Like compared to like 4 or 5 years ago, I'm like, okay, I can see significant improvement. And I think as long as you can look at that and remind yourself like, hey, I'm still learning. Like that's what I do is like, yeah, I've been in this for 6 years now. I'm still learning a ton, like every day. And I think that's an important mindset to have, no matter how old you are or how many years you've been in the industry. You're always going to learn something new. And the whole, self-doubting stuff, that'll happen. But like I said, I think it gets easier with time, and you don't do it as often.
It's funny that you mentioned you look back at your old reels. I actually somehow dug up my first story that I did with the Oracle, and I was reading through it, and I was like, oh boy. I was like, what was I thinking? But it wasn't as bad as I originally thought, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
But
Good.
that brings us, like, I guess, to our next point. Obviously, when you're dealing with that sort of doubt, at least for me, I look to other people and I see, what are they doing to kind of overcome that. So my question is, who are your biggest inspirations in this field? I mean, especially as you're starting out in Wisconsin, who is that kind of rock, basically?
So I think in terms of people, are we speaking about just people in the industry?
Yeah, I mean, someone that you
Okay.
someone that you kind of look to as a
Yeah.
role model.
So a guy that I liked a lot was a dude that just kind of randomly reached out to me. His name was Kevin Holden, and he is the sports director at the CBS station in Milwaukee. And I went to go cover a Packers practice, and I think it was like one of the first ones I ever did. And he randomly reached out to me and started talking to me. Like I was just by myself with my camera, and he just kind of sat down with me and just started chit chat. Like, hey, what's up? You look new on the beat. Like, what's your name? Blah 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 blah. Extending the olive branch. And he was just always super happy, super friendly, and really helpful. Like, when I went to go do those Packers practices, I was pretty much the only one there, one man banding. Like I had to, go in the locker room with my camera and my mic. Everyone else has a photog and a mic. And it was difficult at times to get interviews because everyone in the state is there on a Wednesday. But Kevin would always help me out and say, hey, like, I'll hold your mic for you. You just worry about getting a good, camera position. Or like sharing sound with me. He'd be like, even though we were the CBS affiliate, I almost forgot. I was like, well, it's CBS affiliate. I couldn't remember. Even like sharing sound, he'd be like, hey, did you happen to get Jordy? I got a really good bite from Jordy. I'll share it to you. I'll retransfer it to you. that was like I always really respected that. And then, I mean, when I was getting ready to leave there and Tallahassee, I sent him both my reels to look at and to critique and to get his, his 2 cents on it. And that's probably a guy that I always appreciated and always kind of talked to with if things kind of were either going bad or if I was having a tough time. I knew I could talk to him, and he was always really helpful in that sense.
Wow. I want to bring some attention to the current climate of what's been going on lately.
Yeah,
And,
absolutely.
it's been hard in the sports industry with COVID-19 just putting everything on hold. So how has reporting during the pandemic been? And, how are some ways that you have adapted?
So it's definitely been challenging, that's for sure. A lot more Zoom interviews than I think I've ever done in my life. But I think the biggest change for folks in TV is obviously for a while there, we weren't doing any on-camera interviews. And then now that we have been doing that, we have been finding unique ways to mic up our interviewees. So like, for example, instead of, putting the mic right up to their, to their mouth, I have a golf club attached to my microphone, and I hold it out like that. And that creates a nice, safe social distance between me and my subject. Stuff like that. Or I know one of my photographers, I saw him, he took his lavalier mic and wrapped it around a light stand that we typically use to light our interviews and just put it next to the guy. And so that way it caught his sound. That's one way in terms of actual video content. In terms of finding stories, that's been super challenging. That's probably been the hardest part, is finding stories to share, because there's only so many times you can regurgitate, right? So-and-so is doing this to work out, or they're doing, they're getting ready they're doing this to stay in shape. Like, all right, we know, like, gyms aren't open, facilities aren't open, they're at home working out. So that's where you kind of have to think outside the box a little bit sometimes and do some different things, or things maybe you normally wouldn't have, right? So like, for example, one I did was, I was curious about, I think when it comes to sports, there's baseball beat writers have a very unique gig compared to beat writers for other sports, right? Because there are 162 games, and they basically are like living in the clubhouse and always around the players. So I was like, I wonder what life is like for those guys, because their life is like totally different now. They're not near a game, they're not near a clubhouse or nothing. And so I interviewed my buddy Josh Solentino, who works for The Athletic, Juan Toribio, who works for MLB.com, and then Mark Tompkin of the Tampa Bay Times, and just kind of got their thoughts on, like, what are they doing like right now? What does your job consist of? How are you going about it? And like, what do you think your job is going to look like when we do come back? And so just something different to switch things up. I'm trying to think of what else I've done. Oh, I think Nolan knew. I did the Rowdies gaming, where they created their own esports team. As soon as I saw that, I was like, oh, I'm definitely jumping on that, because it was two things I was passionate about: FIFA, which I love, and soccer and the Rowdies. So once I saw them, launch that, I was like, oh, definitely we need to do something on that. Normally, if we weren't in a pandemic, maybe we wouldn't have done a story on them, because we would have, I think the baseball season would have been starting up. The Rowdies would have been in this season. A lot more stuff would have been going on. High school baseball and softball would have been going on. But now that there's a little more free time, we can do fun stuff like that.
It's funny you mentioned that Rowdy's esports team. Actually, I know you hopped on with them and you played a game with them. And just a little bit, I want to touch on your Twitch channel. Is that something that you started up just during this whole thing, or is that something you had beforehand?
No, I just started it, like literally, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. And I'll be honest, I knew what Twitch was. I just never was really into it myself until we got into the pandemic, and then I kind of saw a lot of people were doing it. And I mean, from like, not just pro athletes like Blake Snell, Devin Booker, bunch of dudes. You also saw, like, one of the bigger ones I would say is the Barstool guys, Big Cat, doing the whole NCAA football. I think last night they did the little national championship. There's 100,000 viewers. I mean, that's a lot of eyeballs just for a video game. And so, I mean, I'm not a huge gamer, but I enjoy playing enough, and I just thought it'd be a fun thing to try and do, and to interact with anybody who wants to watch and talk about sports, and or play me in any of the video games. Although I'd probably lose in any Madden game because I'm still kind of trying to get the hang of Madden. FIFA I can do well. FIFA I can hang in there.
Was last question from me at least.
Yeah.
With the news that dropped, what was it, yesterday actually, or the other day now? The days are kind of just all coming together. That a couple USF football players tested positive for it, and then on top of that, we have some people from Texas. What was it, 6 people or something like that, and quite a few in the AAC at least. With that, especially in Florida now, as the cases are going up more and more. I try and look optimistically at the football season, but I also try and keep a sense of realism too. And, I'm kind of wavering between both, but how do you keep that sense of optimism? How do you stay on that line of optimism versus realism? I mean, optimistically, you want to say, yeah, there's going to be a season. It's going to be great. Realistically, it's like, we don't know. So how do you kind of keep that?
It's hard. It's a hard line to straddle. It's hard. It's difficult. It's definitely difficult. I like, for me, you would ask me a couple of weeks ago when things were kind of starting to trend downward and it seemed like we were sort of getting a hang of this. I would have said, yeah, I think we do have fans in the stands. Maybe not 100% capacity, but like maybe 50. I don't know, a couple chairs in between groups. Now with the recent spikes, I don't think so. I don't know. It seems very highly unlikely to me. And I know a lot of folks on like Twitter, trolls, and what I call them, whatever, say, oh, the media doesn't want to see football played, or, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, bro, nobody wants that. We all want football. Otherwise, we don't have a job. And then besides that, I like football. I would love to see football be played. I'm just also trying to be realistic about it and realize, like, this is a pandemic. Lives, the health of not just, I know student athletes will say, well, they're healthy. That's fine. They're healthy. But what about the coaches around them that are elderly? What about the staff around them that might be elderly? Their grandparents, maybe their parents are elderly. That's where I'm worried about, more so those folks. I'm sure the players will be fine, right? They're young, but it's the people around them. That's why everyone's like, wear a mask, right? It's not, maybe you'll be fine. Maybe you're young and you're healthy. It's not so much about you. It's about people around you. And so, but it's difficult to kind of go back and forth. Like right now, I'm like 50-50. I really don't know if I think it's a flip of the coin, whether we play football or not. I'm like you, I'm optimistic. I say yes, I think we do. But my guess is probably no fans, which is weird, but I'd rather that than no football at all, I think.
I don't have anything else, so.
No, awesome.
All right, well,
Thank
we're
you guys
kind of
so much.
Yeah, we're running out of time a little bit. I know you got to get going and, a little bit from now, but Kenny, thank you so much for joining us. This is so much fun. We really appreciate you coming on and just sharing your story and your thoughts.
Absolutely. No problem. Thank you so much for having me. Anytime you guys want me on or want to talk again, y'all let me know. And if you ever have anybody there at the Oracle, right? USF Oracle,
yep.
That has any questions about the industry, has a demo reel they'd like critiqued, or just anything else, feel free to reach out to me. They hit me up on Twitter. I think my DMs are open. Hit me up.
I'll reach out next semester.
There you go. Boom.
We'll link your Twitter and everything. We'll even link your Twitch too, kind of get you some traffic over on there too.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Kenny, we hope to see you out on the USF beat. Hopefully we'll have a season 2 cover. Again, I'm staying optimistic, but Kenny, thanks again. Appreciate it.
For sure, man. Thank you guys. Anytime.
That's our show, everybody. And before we sign off, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at USF Oracle Sports. And I'll see you guys next week. I'm Hannah Halili.
And I'm Nolan Brown. Thanks again for joining us, and stay safe out there. Wear your mask.